The case of Lucy Letby is something I've looked at occasionally, and I have a lot of sympathy for Lucy Letby. I don't know whether she is guilty or whether she's not guilty, but I do know that the case attracted a lot of attention and continues to attract a lot of attention, and better minds than mine are engaged in suggesting that she is, in fact, innocent of all the charges that she faced. She was convicted of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 others. It's one of the most harrowing and complex legal cases in recent British history, and it's now become a focal point for examining potential miscarriages of justice within our criminal system. And former Conservative Minister Sir David Davis has made a compelling argument for a retrial, highlighting grave concerns over how the case was handled, both procedurally and evidentially. And Letby's conviction was based really on circumstantial evidence, statistical anomalies, and expert testimony that has since been challenged by some of the most eminent minds in neonatal medicine and statistical analysis. And it's got nothing to do with whether you like Lucy Letby or you don't like Lucy Letby. It's about the evidence against her, and the evidence doesn't stack up. Davis, who initially believed in Letby's guilt, was approached by professionals who argued otherwise, and he was convinced. And they include past presidents of the Royal Statistical Society and the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, individuals whose expertise dwarfs that of the prosecution's expert witness. And one of the most striking elements in the case is that of Dr. Dewey Evans, whose medical testimony was pivotal in securing Letby's conviction, yet Evans' credibility has been repeatedly called into question. I remember reading quite an interesting article by Nadine Dorris, where she pointed out how he allegedly shifted his opinion on key mechanisms of death even after the trial, and his testimony has been criticised in unrelated cases. If such a witness can shape the outcome of a case, doesn't this demand greater scrutiny on how expert evidence is assessed and presented in any court? The core of Davis's argument lies in what he describes as the judicial system's procedural rigidity, and much of the evidence that could potentially exonerate Letby, such as detailed analysis of medical notes by consultant neonatologists, was available during the trial but wasn't presented by her defence, and this failure allowed the Court of Appeal to dismiss it under the premise that the defence should have raised it earlier. Davis says so well, if your defence team wasn't good enough to present this evidence, then you stay banged up for life. So it's not Lucy Letby who's being judged, it's her defence team. And it's convenient perhaps for the judiciary, but I don't think it's justice. Consider the 2 examples that are highlighted by Davis. One is baby O. The prosecution argued that Letby caused this baby's death by injecting air into his system. Yet newly reviewed case notes suggest that baby O's death resulted from errors by the hospital team, including excessive pressure during resuscitation that overinflated his lungs, pushing the diaphragm and liver into the abdominal cavity, and a subsequent misjudged needle insertion into the abdomen further compounded this tragedy. Nothing to do with injecting air into his system. Baby C, this tiny infant born profoundly unwell, showed clear signs of abdominal obstruction, including bile vomiting and failure to open his bowels. However, the medical team didn't address these symptoms adequately. The prosecution's argument rested on an X-ray showing air in the abdomen, allegedly caused by Letby. Yet it has since emerged that Letby wasn't even at the hospital when the X-ray was taken. Both cases point to failure in the neonatal care, not to malicious intent by a single individual. Indeed, an outbreak of a lethal bacterium at the Countess of Chester Hospital during this period was not disclosed to the jury, raising further doubts about casualty. Davis's critique extends to the judicial system's resistance to revisiting flawed convictions. And this echoes, I think, the plight of Andrew Malkinson, who served 17 years for a crime he didn't commit because of procedural inertia and the system's unwillingness to admit error. Letby, like Malkinson, faces a monumental task in proving her innocence despite mounting evidence suggesting significant failings in her trial. The legal system in the UK seems more concerned with its own self-importance than it is in seeing justice done. And Davis draws attention to the broader implications of the NHS's inability to acknowledge its own shortcomings. Suboptimal care, under-resourced units, clinical errors are issues that run through the system, and they must be addressed to prevent further future tragedies. By pinning blame on Letby, the NHS avoids confronting its own culpability, perpetuating a cycle of negligence and denial. And the stakes in this case transcend the individual. As Sir David said, this may be judicially convenient, but it's not justice. Our legal system must have the humility to revisit its errors, particularly when lives hang in the balance. Procedures should never trump truth, and the law must serve as a mechanism for justice, not a rigid arbiter of past mistakes. It's time for the Criminal Cases Review Commission to act decisively, and Letby's case deserves a retrial, not to exonerate her prematurely, but to ensure that justice, real justice, true justice, is done. And as citizens of a society that values fairness and integrity, we must demand no less. We must turn every possible page until we are sure no more can possibly be turned, no more can possibly be discovered. There shouldn't come a point at which we say justice is now final if there are still question marks hanging in the air. Justice must be revised and revised and revised as new issues, as new ideas come along. There must never be a point when we say, absolutely, we now know, particularly if the individual has not confessed to a crime. If there is any debate, we must revisit and revisit and revisit. We must turn every page until we are certain that the decision is correct.